Director of Leadership Development at the Southern Education Foundation. We know that this is a busy time for everyone with wrapping up semesters and as well as gearing up for the holidays. So I want to start by thanking everyone for joining us on this Prospective Fellows webinar. We really value your time. Just a little bit about the flow of the next hour. I will start by giving just a brief snapshot of SEF as an organization. Then we will shift into an overview of the Southern Education Leadership Initiative Fellowship. We will then transition into what I believe to be one of the most valuable aspects of today's discussion, where you will be hearing directly from CELI alumni about their firsthand experiences in the fellowship. Lastly, a quick overview of the application process, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. Just one quick note about Q&A. There is a feature you should see at the bottom of your screen where you can ask questions throughout the presentations in a chat box. I believe you just click that question mark that says ask, and we will either answer to you directly, or you can raise your hand to ask a question, and we will either answer to you directly, or we will publish a question with an answer if we think it's something valuable for the entire audience. So again, I know this is a busy time for people, so I want to go ahead and just jump into it so we can use your time efficiently. So first slide, please. So about the Southern Education Foundation. Founded in 1867, originally as the George Peabody Education Fund, SEF has more than 150 years of experience in supporting and fighting to improve public education in the South. We like to think of ourselves as sort of a hybrid think, action, tank nonprofit, and our mission is to advance creative solutions to ensure education equity and excellence in education for low-income students and students of color in the South. In terms of our vision, SEF really sees a world where education is indeed the great equalizer that it was initially conceptualized to be, and that every student, regardless of their background, race, or class, enjoys an education that really propels them toward the opportunity-rich lives that they deserve. Next slide, please. So next, I will talk a little bit about how we actually try to accomplish this mission and vision. First, as our name says, geographically, we are focused on what is considered to be the American South. Our region consists of 17 states, really starting west at Texas and Oklahoma, and then moving east over. And it includes what some might consider northern states as Maryland and Missouri. We also work across the P16 education continuum, which means that we are working on issues as early learning, early childhood, all the way through post-secondary and higher education. And thirdly, our strategies. We utilize 3 strategies to really accomplish our work. The first is analysis and solutions, really looking at the data and the trends in education across our region to really understand what's going on and where we might want to focus our efforts. Our second strategy would be advocacy, and this is really using our data and research to support a range of partnerships and coalition activities designed to advance the cause of education equity through collective means, and that really is strengthening the capacity of advocates and stakeholders to really make the case for equity and excellence. And then finally, leadership development, which is my portfolio work, which is in many ways an extension of our advocacy work, but more intentionally uses fellowship models to cultivate what we think are called a constellation of leaders that can really bring our ideas and our data to life. They can use their voice as well as their positional power to be change agents and really transform education policy and practice so that race and class are no longer the most reliable predictors of student success. And CELI falls into this bucket, the leadership development category. I will also add that SEF has an emerging strategy around government affairs, and it's where we will be really more active in the policy arena, working to advance and support specific legislation that lead to more equitable outcomes for all students. So that is SEF in a nutshell. I would also like to invite you all, if interested, to visit our website to learn more about each of the strategies, as well as our history and our publications, and even a recap from some of our most recent events, like our Issues Forum that was held in Little Rock last month. So next slide, please. So now I'll transition into talking about CELI, which is what you all are here for, and one of our longest standing signature programs. So the mission of CELI is what we call the Southern Education Leadership Initiative, is really to empower this next generation of innovators, thinkers, and leaders to be effective change agents in education. The program was developed in 2004 to mark the 50th anniversary of the United States Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education. At the time, the belief was that we were falling short of really accomplishing the promises of Brown, and that there was still a lot of work to be done in ensuring that all students, irrespective of race and class, received an excellent education. So SEF thought that this new generation of leaders and thinkers with both what we say are big hearts and ideas was needed to carry on this work, and that in particular, this generation was needed to be given opportunities where they could grow professionally and develop their skills to lead the work, thus leading to the creation of CELI. In 2019, we will be heading into our 15th year. And over the course of the last 15 years, SEF has provided over 200 students with inspiring leadership development opportunities to work in education issues throughout the South. Through CELI, we've had both a pool of talented and diverse young leaders or emerging leaders that have conducted important research. They have done policy analysis. They have done advocacy, community organizing, all across the region, in more than 100 nonprofits, foundations, and school districts. Next slide. Now, this slide really just gives you a glimpse into the types of placements. We try to pair students based on the student's ability, their skills, their education interests, which they will get to note and rank on the application, as well as the need and capacity of the organization based on a work plan that is provided for the organization. Like, our goal is really to provide the fellows with a very meaningful experience. So you'll see we have some foundation partners with Foundation for the Mid-South. We have school district partners, Bibb County Schools, other nonprofits specifically working on early learning and college access. So it really runs, there's a wide range and runs the gamut in terms of the opportunities for placement. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about program logistics. This is not an exhaustive list, but highlights some of the major components. Again, fellows will be placed with a partner organization based on the proposed project and the fellow's skills and education interests. The fellows will be placed for 8 weeks, which this summer or next summer will be starting May 27th and end July 19th. And fellows will work full-time, so that means a 40-hour work week in their placement sites. The goal is really to work through a work plan, a proposed project with the partner organizations. Plans can include, or projects can include, a number of things, as we said earlier, including research, white papers, data collection, helping to prepare for legislative agendas. What I do really want to highlight is that we are very clear with our partners that this is not an administrative role, that the fellows are not to be bogged down with administrative tasks, and that we really are looking for to develop the skills and mindsets in a meaningful way. And our partners really do work with us to honor this. So in addition to the 8 weeks, fellows will attend both an orientation here in Atlanta to kick off the fellowship. Those dates will be May 22nd to 29th. And this is sort of a primer of sorts for the summer, exposing the students to a number of issues that they might be working with, hearing from some of our partners on some of the issues, policy issues, also some of the organizing issues, and also to really take a deeper dive into some of the strategies and legislative things that SEF wants to work on. And so the fellows, once selected, will leave from orientation and go directly to their placement sites. Again, this will be in Atlanta, May 22nd to 24th, and SEF will pay to get the fellows here, and attendance is required. So if a fellow cannot participate fully in orientation, they cannot be a fellow for the summer. Then after your 8 weeks, you will attend a closing meeting where you will come back to Atlanta to really share out your experiences and your lessons learned and reflect on the summer. This year will be July 24th through 26th here again in Atlanta. I just want to really underscore that attendance is required for both the orientation and closing. Again, SEF will cover and arrange your travel and get you to your summer placement sites. Also want to note that CELI is a paid opportunity, which is very critical. I know that that's important for a lot of students. So fellows receive a stipend, undergrads receive a $4,500 stipend, and graduate or professional degree level students will receive $5,000. And also want to note that while SEF does cover travel expenses, the student is responsible for covering housing costs while at their placement sites. We do try to work with the students to find housing where the support is needed so that the cost is as reasonable as possible. So next slide, please. So a little more about what it takes to be a fellow. So generally, fellows are between the ages of 20 and 32. I think for 2019, we are actually going to extend that age. So from 20 to 35, you can qualify to be a CELI fellow. You must be currently enrolled in either a four-year college or a graduate level program. It can be anywhere in the country, but preferred to be in the South. And preference is usually given to students in the South. Also, students have to be an equivalent of a rising junior. So we'll be going into your junior year, have completed 60 hours in undergraduate after the summer. We accept all majors, but again, preference will be given to majors that really demonstrate an interest in social justice or education equity or just education policy and practice overall. And two things that are really critical. We ask all fellows that they do not take on any other type of coursework, training, test preparation, or job opportunities in the summer. This is a full-time position, and the fellows must be able to dedicate their time to that. And that while relocation is not always mandatory, fellows or applicants should be willing to relocate to another city if necessary. And so just so you know, and I'll talk more about the application later, submission, you have to obviously to submit a complete application. The deadline will be March 4th, 2019 at 5 p.m. Again, I'll talk more about it at the end before we go to Q&A, but obviously an application is required for you to be considered for the fellowship. So next slide. Okay, so again, I think we are moving now into what I think is the most valuable part of this. I think obviously the overview of the program at SEF is important, but hearing from actual fellows or past fellows or CELI alum about their experiences and for them to be able to answer your questions firsthand, I think is critical. So we are going to hear from two of our fellows from our most recent class. We have Chloe Sykes, who was a 2018 fellow, and she was placed in Austin at the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And then we will hear from Edward Wiggins, and Chloe is a doctoral student. She's a third year doctoral student. And then we will hear from Edward Wiggins, who is now a junior at Xavier University in Louisiana, and he was placed at Foundation for the Mid-South. So we can go ahead and turn that over to Chloe. We're going to hear from Chloe first.
Right. Hi, Kanita. Should I just go ahead and jump right in? Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, hello, you are. I was muted already.
Okay.
You are on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe Sykes. As Kanita mentioned, I'm a third-year doctoral student in educational leadership and policy at UT Austin. And as she also mentioned, my placement this past summer was also in Austin. So just as Kanita was saying with the overview of the program, it seemed like at least half our cohort was placed where they had some affiliation already. It seemed like they really made an effort to keep you connected in the South in a meaningful placement. But if it could be where you were, then that was at least my experience. So I was here in Austin at the Center for Public Policy Priorities, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit think tank that does a lot of policy research. And they mostly do research around economic issues, healthcare, and tax policy. And within their economic agenda is where education falls. So I was mostly working on school finance work that they were following in the state legislature or state legislative bodies. So there was actually a commission on public school finance going on this summer. So my supervisor and I would attend hearings, do follow-up, look at expert testimony, what was going on, conduct statewide research with the Texas Education Agency data to examine various school finance related questions. A couple of the products I came up with, and I'm just referring to my notes on the side here, a couple of the products that she had me working on, my supervisor had me working on, were very meaningful. As Kanita mentioned also, that I made copies sometimes and printed things off, but mostly I was doing policy research and assembling it for an advocacy agenda. So it was a very meaningful experience and placement. So the two products and projects I was really working on were, one was an 11-part, one-pager series. So there were like 11 one-pagers that will be used in the upcoming state legislative session in Texas that will start in January for the spring. And those were one-pagers that were going to be used for a coalition that the organization I was working for is a part of. So I also was able to engage in a lot of coalition work with other foundations, nonprofits, state agencies, school districts, also some private companies that are engaged in public education and school finance work. So this one-pager series has actually, I've already started to see it come out on Twitter and be released by some of those other coalition members. But it was just putting together, data, distilling it into a fact about school finance, whether it was about the state versus local share into the school finance system, or different facts about the school finance formula statewide in Texas, a number of different types of one-pager facts that are easy and digestible. And that took a lot of research and combing through data, which was a really good experience for me. And then the other product I was working on was about a 20-page primer or policy pamphlet on bilingual education in the state of Texas, specifically looking at how we fund bilingual education, but also getting into some of the pedagogical and curricular and student outcomes associated data with bilingual education in the state of Texas. So that was a great learning experience for me to comb through a lot of different historical data, theory a little bit, but also really put a heavy emphasis on the policy data from the state public education system to look at student outcomes, school finance, compare how Texas does against other states, and create a meaningful policy brochure, 20-page brochure on that issue. Um, I know have a few other questions to address. I'm sure some other things might pop up. But the most meaningful part of my experience with CELI, being a CELI fellow, was also that even though I live in Austin and I'm a graduate student, I've been doing some of this work, I really got to see how policy research is bridged into advocacy work that can be a kind of a black hole of research and knowledge. And at least for me as a graduate student, it it's difficult to straddle that divide between academic research, which we're trained in, and then policy research for policymakers and policy people, which is really a whole different beast. It requires the same skills, but it's like speaking a different language. Like your writing is different, the format is different, the data you're presenting and how you're framing issues and approaching a problem, a question, a research question is a little bit different. And so I felt like I was just able to almost like become totally fluent differently in policy research oriented for a policy audience, but also use my graduate studies in terms of theory, history, rooting a research question beyond just a policy outcome and really asking questions about racial equity and doing this policy research and figuring out what are we really advocating for? How are we designing these products, this information to be used beyond just a simple policy outcome or policy analysis? Is it part of a larger advocacy agenda for equity in public education? So that was a really meaningful skill for me and really has helped shape how I'm going into my dissertation phase as far as research goes. And for career goals, I mean, working with the Southern Education Foundation, as well as the foundations that were part of the coalition I was working with within my placement, exposed me a lot to the foundation world. I didn't think I wanted to be a professor or go into academia, although there's a lot of that I enjoy. So working with foundations, I was able to get a sense of, okay, there's nonprofits, there's state agencies, there's private organizations, but there's also these foundations that do in-house research and fund the research, and then are also part of advocacy coalitions or governmental relations branches that they have to be able to advance legislative goals at the state and at the federal levels. So that was exciting for me in terms of career goals. I have a couple more years left, but in my program, but that's a whole sector I hadn't paid much attention to or knew much about. So going forward, hopefully I might get a job with someone like that. And it opened my eyes to the different ways that policy research can be conducted and who's a part of those conversations. I guess I'll leave it at that, unless there's anything to address.
Well, thank you, Chloe. So thank you for sharing your experience. I have a question for you, but I would also like to note, which I didn't note, is that Chloe also has the distinct honor of being SCF's first ever, awarded SCF's first ever Jenny Looney Servant Leader Award, which was an award created to honor at least one fellow in a cohort. And and I would like to say it was a tough decision. Anyone in their cohort could have won this award. They were really just a great group, but one that just went above and beyond through their fellowship, won both kind of the cultural aspect of it and as well as the tangible, concrete activities and products that they produced. And so we're really proud of Chloe, but again, anyone in their cohort, they were all nominated because they were just so great, and we're really proud of them. But Chloe, I would like to ask you if you would share your thoughts on why someone should apply for CELI. Like why, if anyone is considering and on the fence, what would you say to them?
Great question. I would say, first of all, there's not a lot of paid opportunities to do meaningful work while you're a student. So this is a really unique opportunity to be able to take advantage of a full-time placement opportunity. And while everyone's means is different, it is really fortunate that this is a paid opportunity for the summer to be able to do full-time work. It's a pretty unique opportunity in that instance. But also, I mean, in terms of really the experience of being a CELI fellow, I'm from Texas. I'm getting a graduate degree at UT Austin, and being able to situate what Texas is doing and what my work is doing, along with a larger Southern agenda for advancing equity in public education, I think was really unique. It's not something that we articulate, I think, enough, perhaps, or at least in my program, about what is the meaning of our work nationally, and how does that come together across bridging, different like similar histories and regional challenges that we have faced, and being in the South, and how do we want to change that, not only through different organizations or different universities, but together as a coalition across the South of how do we want to engage in this work. There is a brain drain of policy folks that go to New York or DC and think that nothing can happen in the South. And I'm a firm believer that the South is leading the country, and whatever the South does, so goes the nation, to follow that great quote. And this is an opportunity to live that. So that was really, really special to me. And I think that anyone interested in figuring out how their local work does articulate with a larger national strategy for improving and advancing public education and equity this is the opportunity for you.
Muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chloe. Really, that response was awesome. I think you also highlighted two important things, or two intended outcomes of CELI. One is to expose young leaders to careers in education that they might not be aware of, like the opportunities to work on education either directly in systems or education adjacent organizations like nonprofits and foundations, state agencies. I mean, it's just so expansive. And I think a lot of times we don't know that. We come into education thinking you can be a teacher, principal, or superintendent. So this is an opportunity to really broaden that perspective on what it means to be working in the education space, and also to really stop the brain drain in the South. This is where, the great quote, as the South goes, so does the rest of the nation, and we need to keep our talent home. So thank you, Chloe, for sharing your thoughts. And I'm sure when we open up for Q&A, you will have more questions coming your way, but we will go ahead and transition over to Edward, who was another one of our fantastic fellows, whose placement site just couldn't sing his praises enough, and really produced some very meaningful work while he was there. So if we could bring Edward up, that'd be great.
Deborah Wiggins. I'm a junior history major at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. Next slide. And so I was placed at the Foundation for the Mid-South in Jackson, Mississippi. And I'm actually a resident of Clinton, Mississippi, so it was like a 20-minute commute to work every day. So it was fun. I got to come home for the summer and, be with my brothers again. So the foundation was a really good opportunity for me because they worked in 4 main target areas. They worked in wealth, health, community building, and education. And so one of my colleagues in the foundation actually used the Jackson water crisis to explain to me how those 4 issues are like intrinsically linked. So even though I kind of focused in education, I really, touched all the areas at some point. So my main task in the foundation was to research assessment data for the public school districts and kind of make recommendations based on the performance of how to kind of bridge the gap between the high-performing districts and the low-performing districts. So I did a lot of research over like in the state testing and like the ACT, that kind of thing. And so in the end, I presented a paper with a set of my recommendations for the foundation. And so some things that I learned, so we had to do a community partner interview as part of our fellowship. And so I interviewed one of their program reviewers, and he said something that really stuck with me. I asked him what was the biggest challenge to the public education system, and he said it was poverty. And he said that poverty had tentacles, and those tentacles kind of, touch every aspect, kind of like what with the foundation. Next slide. Okay, so I talked about that. Next slide. Okay, and so these are kind of, like I said, these were the things that I looked at as I was doing my research. So I looked at the high-performing districts and low-performing districts and compared their demographic data and their student assessment data. Next slide. And so then this is kind of what I found for the low-performing school districts. You see the dropout rate and the graduation rate, and then the major forms of assessment that they used. Next slide. And so here was kind of the same thing for the higher performing school districts. And so actually, I'm a product of Clinton Public School District, go arrows. Next slide. Okay, so these are kind of some of the key findings of my research, the factors that affected. So like I saw that race was an important, factor in affecting the performance of the school districts, as well as the socioeconomic data there, again, poverty. And then planning. I noticed that most of the high performing school districts had like a strategic plan that you could access from their district's website, not so much with the lower performing districts. And then I also saw that like a lot of the high performing school districts had some institution of higher learning, in the area, and there were some meaningful partnerships. And then again, geography. So in the Mississippi Delta, a lot of the lower performing school districts were localized in that area because it's so rural and kind of starved of economic opportunity. And then also I noticed education alternatives. So like in a lot of the low performing public school districts, there was a comparative private school that a lot of the students that maybe could have, helped the performance of the school district were all attending there. Next slide. And so then these were some of my recommendations. Expanding community coalition building, which is a lot of the work that the foundation already does. Same with expanding local business development and developing teacher talent. Because, we learned that with a lot of programs that would place teachers in the district, they would just be there for their placements and then leaving their talent, taking their talent and expertise with them. And so, because I found that a lot of the ways to improve the quality of public education in these lower performing districts was for, it was a long continual process. And when the people leave and take their talent with them, there's not really that chance for them to kind of, work through making it better. And then finally connecting research to activism. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more. I still have some more stuff in my notes. So in addition to learning that poverty was the greatest threat to public education, I learned that impacting education could happen, beyond the classroom. So even though I'm a history major, I want to be an English teacher. And so at first I thought that I would just have to change the world one student at a time. But now through my placement, I learned that, I can make an impact in education in a larger scale. And it doesn't just have to be as like she said, a teacher, principal, superintendent, because there's the administration aspect and the policy aspect and even community organizing. And so I also learned finally that curriculum building is kind of the area I think I want to be in. So now when I'm looking at summer research programs, I'm looking at programs that are working on building curricula that are inclusive in their means of education. So yeah, any questions?
Thank you, Edward, for sharing your experience. Again, the foundation could not sing your praises enough, and we really appreciate you going there representing SEF and yourself the way you did. So my question for you, similar to Chloe's, the question I gave Chloe is, what would you say to someone considering applying to CELI for the next summer's fellowship?
You should definitely do it because it's a great opportunity. Aside from the placement and the stipend, you get to network with a bunch of great people. So our cohort, we have our group meet and we still, send each other pictures of our time together and for the orientations. And so we trade pictures. It was just a great opportunity to meet people that are, passionate about education like you are. So even I was scrolling through Instagram the other day and I saw one of the other fellows had posted, the flyer for today's webinar in it. And that same fellow is still working, building curricula for students, in marginalized groups. And it's just great to know that I know these people and we have allies as we work to kind of, improve the state of public education in the South.
Okay. Thank you for that, Edward. I think your point about the network, I think, is one that's really valuable and one that we hear from a lot of fellows. And not only networking with each other, but CELI broadens your network of just people in the education space overall. And then even one of your cohort members just came to our recent forum, and so expanded their network, and we invited him and sponsored him to come. So just opportunities like that of being connected with SEF and as a CELI alum, I think as you said, it's just a wonderful opportunity to really work. So I think in a few minutes we will go to general Q&A, and I think our administrators are wanting us to chat questions in the box, and then we would publish them or broadcast them. So, but before we do that, I'm going to go to one final slide to just talk about the application. So it is live today. It actually went live yesterday. It's on our website, southern-education.org. It will include a number of components. One is a Google form where you just go put in kind of like your identifying information about yourself and your school, and be able to rate your education interests. Also, it includes some other things that will make your application complete. We'll need a resume, which is good practice just to have your resume up to date anyway. We will need transcripts, unofficial version is accepted. I do want to emphasize that this is not because of the GPA requirement. We just want to get a sense of what you're studying, and if you have shown some interest in education or social justice. So again, not to look at your GPA, but just to see kind of what you're studying. Also, you'll need 2 letters of references. You will have to do a personal statement, and then there are a couple of short answer questions, and you submit it all in one email. You will email it to CELI@southern-education.org, and you will put your last name, first name, CELI 2019 application in the subject line. And again, those are all due March 4th. Please be on time. Please be sure, just some kind of tips as you're doing this, start asking for your letters of reference early, and so that you can remind them that those are due. And as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you are having any questions or concerns while you're completing the application. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. And I'm going to bring Chloe and Edward up so that we can all answer questions. And our administrator just asked me to let everyone know to use the question icon to officially ask a question, instead of typing it in the chat or informal. And if that gets too difficult, just try to speak your question out. So we are open to questions, and we'll just answer them as they come in. And if we see that there are no questions, we will end. Just so you know, this webinar will be published on our website once it's completed. Okay, so our first question: how much experience with research and data analysis do students usually bring to the program? So it really varies. So we are not asking students to come with particular expertise in research and very part of the beauty of CELI is to help develop that expertise, but obviously students come with varied experiences. So someone who's an undergraduate, like Edward, may not have, and he may, I don't want to speak for Edward, but may not have as much research and data analysis experience as someone who's a doctoral student who is doing, data collection and empirical studies like that. So it just runs the gamut, and we are aware of that, and that's why we try to place students based on their interests and skills. And then this year, we hope to add a module around research. Oh, that's so funny. Phaedra, your next question: what does the training session normally cover? So this is going to be a new year for CELI, and there are some tweaks to the program. So generally, the training, and I'm guessing you mean orientation, the orientation is really kind of a real kind of overview of SEF in more detail, some exposure to the type of jobs and experiences that you might be having. So we will usually hear from different panels on policy and analysis and advocacy, because that might be some role. We will hear from community organizing. And so it's usually a lot of speaking engagements to really get you brought up to some of the issues and the types of experiences. But this year will be incorporating a much more of a curriculum, and that it will also incorporate some actual concrete lessons on the different issues or issue areas or policy areas that SEF is looking to be in the policy arena on. And so you will get some training on school reform, some on school funding, school governance, school takeovers. We also want to add a module on just what you need to do for research, just like kind of a research 101. So really more of a concrete experience in terms of skill building and technical and expertise building than in past years. But that's a great question. And we had someone just thank us, and they said they very much enjoyed hearing from Chloe and Edward, and I appreciate them sharing their experiences as well. I really cannot say enough about just how awesome their cohort was. And so, and I obviously don't want to volunteer them, so I won't, but hopefully you all will be available if anyone has specific questions about experiences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay. And if there's any question too that I'm answering that you guys want to jump in on, please do, because you have actually done the work of a Sully Fellow, so please don't hesitate to jump in.
Can I add just one anecdotal thing?
Yes, please.
So I think I saw a question about, there's the question about research and analysis and STATA, the statistical package. So it seemed like all of in our cohort, everyone's experiences, what they were actually doing, just varied on the work plan from the placement site. So some were doing, community partnership work, some were doing more research oriented things like I was and happened to be doing. But I have very low statistical knowledge and need more of it. And so working on stuff this summer was able to introduce me to just how to find publicly accessible education data, because that's a lot of what I was doing. And I didn't have experience really of just going out and getting data that's free because it's public government data. So then when I returned to my coursework this semester and I took an advanced quantitative class, I was able to actually use some of those research skills of just how do I find this data, how do I clean data and make sense of it, and ended up using it for one of my semester projects and writing my final paper on bilingual education spending in the state of Texas and trying to just do some baby statistical modeling with it. But all that to say is that I was able to use the research skills I learned this summer and bring it back to my coursework and really apply that in how I'm thinking about framing my dissertation and trying to grow other skills that I need to do some work on. So I don't know if there's always statistical analysis as part of a placement, but it's a skill that you might be able to take home with you and expand based on your experience.
Thank you, Chloe. That's a great anecdote. And again, another byproduct, a positive byproduct of what we're hoping you're getting, that it does really connect to your real world experience and your academic experience and make that bridge between the two. We just had one question come in about the number of fellows, and we have traditionally had cohort sizes between 10 to 12, some as large as 15. This year's cohort will be 20 fellows, so we will have 20 slots to fill, and it is pretty competitive. And I'm glad you asked that, because I would just advise you all, sometimes we get upwards of 100 to 200 applications for those few slots. So be really thoughtful in your statements and your questions. making sure that you're proofing your applications and that you are working with your references to get everything on time, because it is a really competitive process and it will be competitive for those 20 slots.
Oh, and can I say something about that too?
Yes.
So actually, I didn't hear back for a long time and thought that I didn't get it. And then I had just given up and I heard that, slots opened up. So don't be discouraged if you don't hear back immediately because, like she said, there are a lot of applications to go through. So, hold out hope until you can't anymore.
And Edward, thank you for sharing that
Mm-hmm.
because it is really, really, and I want to really emphasize that when students are not selected, I mean, sometimes, honestly, it's a function of they just didn't put forward a good application. But a lot of times we have just really talented people, but their interests and skill just don't necessarily align with the work plans and placement sites that we have. And so, as more placement sites come in, there are more opportunities to bring in more fellows that align with the skills. Like, we are really thoughtful about trying to make a match and not just place fellows anywhere just to do work that will not be meaningful and relevant into what they want to do with their careers and also what our partners need. We just had one question about, are fellows from bigger cities usually able to be placed in their hometowns? So placement, again, depends on the placement sites. So we have in the past have had a number of partner organizations that apply for fellows. This year, we're going to be a little more intentional about placing fellows that align with some of our already organized programming at SEF. So we have another fellowship called the Racial Equity Leadership Network, which is for superintendents that want to work on equity issues in their districts. So if possible, we would like to place a fellow with a Relland fellow, a Sully fellow with a Relland fellow. And so it really aligns more, not necessarily with location, but or is not dictated necessarily by location, but where our partner organizations are and their needs. So the short answer is there's an opportunity, but it will not be you will not be placed in your hometown just because it's your hometown.
Kenita, could I add something really quickly to that?
Yes, please.
Just because it was something I didn't realize until I was deeper in the application process, that different placement sites apply each year. So it's not a static list of placement sites. Is that right? It's a placement site has to apply just like an applicant, and then based on that year's applicants and placements, a match is made. Is that correct?
That's exactly it. Yes, Chloe, it is. Because it depends on, it may even depend on what's going on in the social political environment. What is it that we really need to be working on and focusing our efforts? Like last year, one fellow was specifically placed because of the gubernatorial races. So it really is a dynamic process, like you said, and depends on the needs. And it is competitive too for the placement sites. Like last year we had 10 and I got over 50 applications for placement sites for host organizations as well. So Sully fellows are highly sought after. So that's why we're trying to be really thoughtful in how we do the placements. So the question asked, what are some things that should be highlighted in your statement and by your letters of reference? And so the letters, there are some very specific questions that you need to answer. They talk about, kind of your experience working on equity or your thoughts of how you would address an equity issue, your interest, your passion. I would say just be really thoughtful in highlighting, showing that you are thoughtful and committed and dedicated to some education equity issue, highlighting your leadership, which is key in your organization, and I would say while there aren't necessarily the reference letters has a template, so they will have some very specific questions. But I would say what's more important than anything is to have someone write your letter that actually knows you and can speak to your experience, can speak to your passion, and can speak to your the value that you can add to this fellowship, and not just ask someone that will give you a general kind of form letter or template or just doesn't know you. I feel like that is probably more important than anything. So be thoughtful about who you ask, and really try to get someone that is gonna write a shining reference for you. So I would say that's probably more important than exactly what they should highlight, but really show your leadership and your commitment to some equity or social justice issue would be key. But also be clear to answer the questions that we're asking you in the application. Are there opportunities for the cohort to interact outside of orientation? So there are not currently in this iteration with CELI. There is the orientation, and then you are all in your placement sites. And then you come back for closing. But I would say that is meaning there is not an SEF organized opportunity, but our hope is that you all will take some initiative as your cohort and start to, one, like I think Edward and Chloe both said that they all created a group me, they talk to each other, we have a virtual platform for you all to interact. So there are definitely ways to facilitate, or that we help facilitate more engagement. But also, some of the onus is on the fellows to be able to do that interaction as well. And then, as we probably make some tweaks to CELI and years that we'll try to bring together. But generally, fellows are placed all across the South, so it's difficult for a face-to-face interaction after orientation until closing. So we probably have time for about one or two more questions. So if you have them, go ahead and get them in. Okay. Well, it looks like we do not have any more questions, so we can go ahead and bring the webinar to a close. Again, I want to thank you all for your time today. And again, thank both Edward and Chloe for coming on to share their experience. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me directly, kwilliams@southern-education.org, or through the CELI email, celi@southern-education.org. But let us know if you have any questions, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Edward. Bye, Chloe. Thank you.